Welcome back to Morning Express. It is now just gone after 7, and joining me now is our person of interest, who is one who is familiar to many of us, especially when you're going to look at the history of Kenya, then you certainly will find his name will pop up several times. He has been in and out of the country on exile several times because his life was at risk, and he'll be telling us why. He is also one who has stood up against some of the regimes that we have had, very vocal and not afraid of controversy or not even afraid to die. He has been in torture chambers. I mean, I could go on and on and on about what he has done, but of course he'll be letting us know what has driven him to that point and how he has kept on. And I'm talking about none other than Koigi Wamwere. Good morning.
Morning.
And great to have you this morning. Thank you for honoring the invite. And Koigi, it's good to have you. And of course, like I've mentioned, there's been very many things that you have done.
Yeah.
Some, of course, may have thought you've done this for various reasons. You're going to be telling us. But let's start from the basics of who Koigi Wamwere is and where you started off from and you're growing up.
Well, that's a difficult question. As my name would suggest, I'm the son of Wamwere. The son of my father Wamwere and my mother Wango Wamwere. And I was born and grew up in Rugongo Forest. My parents were forest workers under colonialism, and life was very difficult for us because really forest workers were treated more or less like slave workers. And they had to endure a lot of poverty, basically. And so I grew up under very difficult colonial conditions, but with a lot of hope that when independence came, it would bring about our liberation.
Right.
Then independence came, and what we had expected would happen did not happen because we wanted to move out of the forest, or at least move out of the conditions we had grown under.
Maybe just to take you back a little bit, while your parents were working in the forest, as you were growing up, what is it that you were doing? Were you a herds boy? Were you working with them in the forest? What is it that you engaged in?
Other than going to school, and we were not able to, I couldn't have been a hands boy because we were not allowed to keep animals.
At that time?
At least not more than 10 sheep. And my father took care of them. But every time that I was not at school, I would be in our we had some small chambers where parents were given to cultivate after clearing the original forest for reforestation with the so-called exotic trees from Europe. So either I would be in the chamber tilling and looking after weeding making sure that the
crops are well tended.
That's right. Or I would be out collecting leaves for the animals, or even drawing water, or going to fetch firewood, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you grew up knowing that at some point independence was almost going to be the gateway to a free nation and things taking a turnaround.
Yes, in fact, everybody spoke of independence as the thing that opened the gate for us into heaven, more or less, because things could not have been worse than they were. And the only thing that gave people hope was the coming of independence. They didn't know when it would come, but things were moving from worse to good gradually, but enough to give people hope, because there were the very dark days in the 50s, in the early 50s, the fighting in the forest. And in the forest where we were, we used to have some Mau Maus operating from there. And that attracted almost daily searches by the military and the police, led by white officers. And that would come with a lot of beating up of our parents. I remember many instances that I saw my father beaten up.
How did that make you feel, watching your father being beaten up, and why was he being beaten up?
Well, basically, he would be beaten up because the white officers had to register their presence. And sometimes Africans were beaten up just to make them realize that, that they were lowly human beings, that they were not equal to the whites, or just, sometimes I think even for the amusement of these white officers. But to stamp their authority, basically.
It was basically to remind every black person that,
yes,
they were the authority.
There was a hierarchy. The whites were at the top of it, and you as a black were at the bottom of it, and that allowed them to beat you up if they wanted. But basically scare you, instill fear, and make you realize who was the master.
Okay, so now as you watched your parents one time or the other being beaten and being mistreated in that sense, did that create a certain sense of bitterness in you?
Yes, it did. It did. In fact, we felt very badly. I associated oppression with white. I never thought that you could have a black person who was oppressive, except for the forest guards and the home guards. These were the only lot we thought among blacks that could be oppressive. Otherwise, we thought that white people were created to be oppressive and they couldn't stay with other people without oppressing them. So as time moved on, things were getting slightly better. And then, of course, there was the time when the detainees were being released. But you asked me how I felt. I felt very bad. But it is the sort of thing that you had come to accept as a way of life. As a way of life. And it also went with a lot of other violence that cascaded from the top downwards, with the whites, the white officers, forest officers would be beating up the African overseers. The overseers then would be beating the workers. The workers would come home rather frustrated. They would beat the mothers, our mothers, and our mothers would kind of end up beating their children, and the children would end up throwing stones at the hands.
So it was literally just
a chain of violence.
Of violence from the top coming down.
From the top down. And it really was like a system. Even when we went to school, like I cannot think of a day that went without my being beaten at school. I was beaten every day.
By who? Teachers?
By teachers.
For no reason, or is it that you are a naughty boy?
Well, there were many reasons why one would be beaten. Sometimes it was that I had come to school late. Sometimes it was because I had picked the monitor. You remember there was something, a piece of...
The monitor, where you'd had to speak...
yeah, for speaking the vernacular language or speaking Kiswahili. We were only... they only wanted us to speak English. So when you spoke Kikuyu, you would get the monitor and you would get some beating for it. And of course you would be beaten for, you know, as I said, the beating up of people had become systemic. People were beating anyone, everybody was beating everybody else that was below them. And this is really how we lived our lives.
Okay. And this, of course, led for you to feel that this country needed liberation.
Yes, I think all of us felt that the word "weathi" or freedom was a very important word. And it was like the key. This is really what will open good life for us. Without it, it would continue to be hell. Because really the type of life we led was hell. And the opposite of it was heaven, and we could only have this heaven after independence. And before that, we saw our leaders being released, Kenyatta and those others with whom he had been detained. The other detained Mau Maus who had also been released as we were getting to the 60s. And there was a lot of hope that, yes, we would get independence, and with it, we would get good life, that we would be able to live in better houses than we lived in. We would be able to eat better food. We might be able to wear shoes. We might
in short,
be able to,
you're going to be equal with the white man that at that time, the colonialists, let me call them, at that time, who are oppressing you.
Absolutely.
You felt there was a chance that you could be equal.
Yeah.
Okay.
For instance, there was a school that was called Francis Court School, which was just for whites, not far from Nakuru town. And I saw that school many times and told myself, this is the school I want to come to. This is really the sort of school I would, because I would compare that school with the school I went to. And our school was miles, apart from this other one. This was the uniforms, everybody looked smart, well fed. There was a the grass was, there was a carpet of grass that was really
well
nice
manicured.
To look. Everything looked like really what a human being ought to have and what we didn't have. We expected that we would be able to get land, which again we didn't have, and we would move out of the forest generally.
Okay. And now, I'm sure many young people of your age at that time probably felt the same way. They had that desire to go to those schools. They had that desire to be equal with everybody else, to wear shoes, to just become a normal citizen of this country. However, for you, you felt that that desire was not enough until you did something. At what point did you feel that as Koigi Wamwere, you needed to do something about this and make a change? There are those who felt the same, but they would go home and probably sleep and hope that one day liberation will come.
To start with, there was disappointment. Sorry.
Sorry. And you're welcome to tweet. Remember, your comments are welcome. I can see Michael Kiptenui here saying, hope you retired because Moi retired. Your advice to Raila, we're going to get to that in just a bit. I can see there's also a tweet here from Koinange who says that a great person of interest. I'm sitting on the edge of the seat to hear the story. So carry on.
So I was saying that my first disappointment was immediately after independence, because I even remember remaining awake throughout the night of independence because I wanted to see heaven come.
With the break of dawn and the pronouncement of now that you're free.
Exactly.
You thought it was something that would happen
overnight.
Overnight.
That's what I expected. But it did not happen overnight, and it didn't look like it was going to happen soon. In fact, once the African leaders settled, and they started, accumulating properties for themselves, they seemed to have forgotten all about everybody else. So we continued to live in the same forest. The parents, were getting the same sort of pay. We were eating the same kind of food.
Nothing changed.
And even the white schools were not opening their doors to us. And somehow I felt that there was betrayal of some kind. Of course, I was too young to think of doing anything about it. And that I waited until after my primary school exam, and had been invited to the seminary which I attended. I wanted to be a priest. At some point, I decided I wanted to be a priest. And so I sought to go to the seminary where I went. I stayed for 4 years, then changed my mind. I thought that there was too much authoritarianism, too much authority in the church. So I thought that I should try something else. I went to Nyeri High School, And after Nyeri High School, I applied for a scholarship to go to the US. Then I went to the US, and that is where I found a different kind of life. First of all, I was very impressed by their development, which made the country look completely different from ours. And I asked myself questions as to why they had managed to do so well for themselves and why we seemed to remain
lagging behind.
Yeah, to lag behind. Nothing was happening, nothing much was happening. Of course, then I did not understand even the political developments, the infighting. The only one notable event that I remember before I went to the US was the assassination of Tom Mboya, which of course was a big shock and made a lot of people angry. I was then at Nyeri High School in Form 5. But once I was in the US, I got introduced into politics by people I met there. I met people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I met people like Maina wa Kenyatta and others. There was another friend called Galo who introduced me to very progressive literature. I also found African students very well organized, demonstrating against apartheid in South Africa and colonialism in the Portuguese colonies and dictatorship in Ethiopia and in other African countries.
So was that the point that now ignited your passion and desire to make a change in Kenya?
Absolutely. That is the literature that radicalized me. And we also came to the conclusion that the Mau Mau revolution had been betrayed, that people had fought for a cause and they were getting nothing in return. The cause had been betrayed.
What would you
and
say
there was need for some young people to do something now to fulfill the dream of the Mau Mau. And then, of course, we asked ourselves the question as, remember people like Malcolm X spoke very well of the Mau Mau.
Yes, I remember seeing a clip where he literally referred to the Mau Mau. What was he saying about the Mau Mau?
He was saying that the black, that African Americans needed to emulate the Mau Mau if they wanted to be free. That there is no way they were going to get their democratic rights or freedoms without fighting for them. And the best example of people who had fought for their own liberation were the Mau Mau. I think Malcolm X did not quite understand the betrayal that had followed independence. So to him, the Mau Mau were the best of the best. And he didn't seem even to talk much about the Algerian struggle, because they also, in Algeria, they had fought a guerrilla war just like the Mau Mau. But it was in the US that I started really to see Mau Mau in heroic terms and to feel that they had fought for a cause that had been betrayed and which needed now to be advanced to its logical conclusion. But who would then have to do this? That's the question that we asked ourselves. And we said that we could not ask for something, for a revolution to be completed, if we were not ready to do it ourselves. And at that point, I got convinced that I needed to get into politics. I needed to join the struggle for democracy, and we needed to have other parties than the only one that was there, and that it was time to come home and plunge into this struggle.
Now, initially when you came back from the US, you came back as a journalist. You
Yes.
came back...
No, I didn't come back as a journalist. I don't know, I came back as I just wanted, as an ordinary person. I didn't even have a profession. I didn't even know what I was going to do other than engage in teaching people about what had not happened.
But you tried
what
a shot
needed to happen.
on journalism or writing stories that you are hoping were going to revolutionize the country.
What happened was that when I got here, I had to ask myself, if we are going to talk about liberation, tell people the need for it, how do we do it? How do I get across to people? Do I call meetings, which I would not be allowed to do? Or how do I explain what I have in mind? And I thought the only way to do that was actually to become a journalist. And so I approached Sunday Post. I asked them whether they could give me an opinion column, which they did. And so every week I had a column talking about the problems of workers, whether it was the forest workers like my parents, or sisal plantation workers, about squatters who are not getting land, again, just like our parents, the poor pay that was being paid, and generally the continuation of poverty that we thought should, whose elimination we thought should have come with independence. So, but every time I wrote an article, the police would come for me, and they would start interrogating me about what I had written and asking me to stop writing. But I did not stop. So I continued being a guest of the police in the station. They would call me there. At least one thing that I knew was that every time it came out, I had to have an encounter with the police. But that did not kill my spirit. I thought that it was necessary to continue fighting until that paper was I think it went bankrupt. I think.
So it stopped publishing.
It stopped publishing, and now I had to look for some alternative. And that is the time I decided that since the elections were not far, I should prepare to run for elections.
Okay, and you tried, attempted, but were not successful. Why do you think you didn't succeed?
I think I was rigged. I was definitely rigged.
So rigging is not something that is new to
No,
election.
No, it's not. I was fighting against Keika Kimani, who was then very powerful.
And he was well seasoned as a politician. He had been
in politics much longer. He had a lot of money. He was heading a group of 2 companies, Mutukanyo and Guatanero. And he had access to a lot of money, vehicles to campaign with. He had government support. He was the organizing secretary, I think, of GEMA. So he had all the powerful people behind him against me. But people were very attentive to what I was telling them. They were very supportive of my ideas. And they gave me full support despite the fact that I was not giving them a single cent. Voters then were very different because they really listened to somebody's policies, ideas, and they were quite willing to support whoever they thought would make their best representative. So after elections, clearly, during the elections, we were intimidated before by police, and our votes were stolen during the counting and before. And unfortunately, after the elections, there came the assassination of J.M. Kariuki. And that is really what got us into a collision course with the government, because we spoke openly against it. We were very bitter. I knew him very well. He was my mentor. I admired his politics a lot. We had our differences because I considered myself a better socialist than he was. Then he was advocating the kind of system they have in Scandinavia, social democracy. And I thought that it was not, that it was a kind of socialism that was not, that would not be liberative enough. So I was critical of him.
Of him.
But we were otherwise at the local local level. He is the person really who was he's the one I looked up to.
You looked up to. Okay. And you had several run-ins with the government, and this is because your views were very radical and very different, and they were towards what was not the norm.
Yes, and yet actually there wasn't much that I was asking for that should have been considered to be outside the norm. Remember, people had gone to the forest to fight for 2 things, land and freedom. That's why the Mau Mau called themselves Land and Freedom Army. So, and it was quite clear, it should have been quite clear to the leaders that people wanted land. They didn't want to continue, people did not want to continue being squatters. They knew that people needed freedom, and that, but what they were willing to offer, or what they had been earned with the independence, was just self-rule. But it was self-rule without freedom, without democracy. And people were not comfortable with this. And so when we told them that it was possible to change this, and we told them of the life, the heaven we had seen elsewhere, and told them that that heaven can be built here. Those people whose heaven I saw had been colonized just like ourselves, and now they have put themselves very high up. And I said, this is possible. And people believed us.
Okay.
But this, the leaders did not want to hear. They thought it was subversion, and that we were giving people ideas of things they could, that the government could not deliver to them.
Achieve. Let's fast forward because of time. And you had a run-in, of course, with the Moi era. There was a time you were in and out of prison. And at some point, I remember a BBC lady even asking why you were in prison. But of course, his answer was that you are a criminal. And maybe we can just have that up sound where the question he was asked is why he has political prisoners, is what you are referred to. And you let us know whether you are a political prisoner or a criminal. But this is what Moi had to say.
There's no, who are the political prisoners? Would you tell me?
Koigi Wamwere.
If he committed crime which is not political, it's not political, I don't regard it as a political prisoner.
Okay, so that's Moi saying that he does not regard you as a political prisoner. In fact, if we continue to that sound, he calls you a criminal. So were you a criminal or a political prisoner?
I was a political prisoner. In fact, I was a prisoner of conscience from the very beginning. And I got into this situation even after getting a warning from Moi personally. There was a time Moi summoned me to his Kabrak home. And we had a long chat for over...
One-on-one?
Yes, one-on-one. Almost, we were talking together with my wife. We were invited together. But the talking was between me and Moi. And Moi was warning me against continuing to talk about land, being critical on the government. And he told me that it was not possible for him to give what I was asking to the people.
Sorry, let me just cut you short a little bit. There's breaking news, and of course we'll keep you informed on this. At least 4 people injured and gunmen attack a house hosting non-locals in Mandera town using grenades and IEDs. Rescue efforts ongoing. That's breaking news. We're just getting the information now. There was an attack in Mandera and at least 4 people injured as gunmen attack a guest house hosting non-locals in Mandera town using grenades and IEDs. Rescue efforts are currently ongoing, and of course right here on KTN News we are going to keep you posted on that as the story develops. But the details we have so far is at least 4 people injured as gunmen attack a guest house hosting non-locals in Mandera town, and that's using grenades and IEDs. So more details will come up as we go along. Do stay with us right here. We're going to fill you in as we get more details. So carrying on, of course, with our conversation with our person of interest today, Koigi Wamwere, basically giving us the history of this country and the fact that now you are a political prisoner. Run me briefly through what was going on in some of those chambers. I saw some of the footage of torture chambers and where you are locked up in some cells in darkness for ages.
But before that, I wanted to explain briefly what my disagreement with Moi was about. We started off very well because Moi even at one point offered me a ministerial position. But I turned it down, asking for time for me to raise questions on behalf of Subukia voters, Nakuru, then called Nakuru North. And I told him that after 1 year, after I have asked all the questions I need to ask for my voters, then I will be ready to join your government. But of course, by that time, differences had a reason that made it difficult for me now to join the government. I was no longer interested in joining Moi's government. But at that breakfast meeting I had with Moi, I told Moi that it was not enough that we had become independent or that we had Kenyatta as president. Now that he was president, I told him that he had to realize that Kenyatta was our Moses. And despite the fact that he was meant to deliver us in Canaan, he had died when we were still in the desert, and that now we needed somebody to take us from the desert
to the promised
land. And I asked him, Mr. President, are you willing to be Joshua that will take us to the promised land? And he did not give me an answer, which actually suggested to me that he was not prepared to take anybody to the promised land, that it was enough that a small class a small ruling class had sneaked into Canaan through the back door. For the majority, we had to be happy remaining in the desert.
And I'll want to know what this promised land is all about, because to this day we still hear politicians, especially when it comes to campaign time, talking about us moving from Canaan to the promised land. So I'll find out from you, what is this promised land that politicians always talk about? And I'm not sure the electorate fully understands what the promised land is if we've not reached. Now, at least 4 people injured. This is breaking news. At least 4 people injured as gunmen attack a guest house hosting non-locals in Mandera. And this was by the use of grenades and IEDs. So this is breaking news coming up from Mandera. At least 4 people have been injured, and this is after gunmen attacked a guest house that mainly houses non-locals, which of course would suggest they are probably targeting non-locals, and this is by use of grenades and IEDs. Details still scanty. As we get more details, we're going to inform you and keep you posted. This is details coming in from Mandera, and this is regarding an attack by gunmen of a guest house that is mainly used to house non-locals, and we know at least 4 people have been injured. We don't have any records or any information on fatalities yet, but as soon as we have that information, we'll certainly keep you informed. Again, continuing with our interview here with a person of interest, Koigi Wamwere, the promised land. What is this promised land that politicians keep talking about, and will we ever get there?
I can only speak for myself, not for other politicians.
So are you in the promised land?
And we are not in the promised land yet, but a few people, a small class, is in the promised land. And the promised land is in Karen, is in Mudaiga, and is in the other posh places. It is in the big business and all that.
Does that mean that the promised land is equitable to wealth? It's equitable to where you live? Because I'm sure even those in Karen probably...
It is equitable to good life. It is equitable to living a respectable, human, honorable life that allows you good food, that allows you to dress decently, that allows you to have a good house, that allows you to take care of your medical needs, that allows you really human dignity. That is the promised land. Is the promised land possible? Yes, in America they live in their promised land. If you go to Scandinavia, where I lived for over 10 years, these people live a life that is almost a heaven on earth. And it's not, they are not living like that. Or if you go to most countries in Europe, you will find that indeed they are in the promised land of more than milk and honey. And the reason why they live like that is because they don't have corruption, they don't have poverty, their people are very well taken care of, they get, in some countries, they get free education, they get free medical care. Some even don't, in some countries, they don't even pay tithe to churches because churches are taken care of by the government. There is supply of just about every human need by the state. And the reason they have that is because they have the kind of leadership that does not engage in corruption, does not engage in wealth grabbing, but in serving their people. So as long as we live as we do, and I'm sure you have been abroad, you have seen how different life is. That life that we see abroad is the sort of life that could make promised land for us. But we seem to be completely comfortable continuing to live in the desert, in poverty, in corruption.
Are we really comfortable, Koigi, or is it that the leaders that you've talked about have kept us there for a reason? I don't think Kenyans are comfortable to live in that kind of environment if we are not yet in the promised land, at least where we have basic needs for each and every individual.
Malcolm X used to say, and I heard this repeated by Gigi Kariuki, that there are times when people live like willing slaves. If you are a slave, you have to fight for your freedom. Freedom will not be fought for you by anybody else. And to fight for your freedom, you have to reject. You have to say you are uncomfortable with your own enslavement. You don't want to be a slave. You want to be a free human being. But if you must fight for that freedom, then you have to get up and fight for it. If you are just sitting there, almost doing nothing about your condition, passively, almost accepting your condition, that's the situation that I'm calling comfort. Although I know nobody is comfortable being a slave. But it is not enough being uncomfortable. You have to be able to do something about to change that condition. Those changes are the ones that have engaged some Kenyans for many years since we got independence. People who said independence without freedom is not enough. We want democracy. Independence without democracy is not enough. We cannot be comfortable if we don't have rights. We cannot be comfortable if we don't have land. We cannot be comfortable if we don't have jobs. We cannot be comfortable if we don't have hospitals.
So what would your advice to Kenyans be right now? Because I can attest to majority not being comfortable with status quo.
They have then to change they have to change the status quo.
How do we do that?
Oh, by getting up and demanding change. And you demand change step by step, point by point. And let me admit that the changes that we now have been fought for and are a testimony to the fact that changes fought for can be achieved. There was a time that we could never have this kind of discussion because the police would have come for us. There was a time that there would only be KBC, television, and radio. We didn't have a free media. You couldn't walk freely. You could not even think. You could not even dream when it was actually criminal to dream. We had all these situations, and yet we have now reversed them by virtue of the effort that people have made. Sometimes in small groups that get bigger until finally you have all the Kenyans coming together to demand something like multi-party democracy, which was being championed by just a few people until everybody reached a point where they said, yes, it makes sense to be free. It's not enough. We must not accept continuing to be in the situation we are in because we are not meant to live like this.
All right. And I would want to hear your comments on where we are today as a country, especially in regards to tribalism and the fact that we are not equal even as we operate, and what we need to do as a country, and what you as Koigi Wamwere would advise as father of this nation. But just to the breaking news, at least 4 people have been confirmed injured in an attack that was earlier this morning, or after suspected Al-Shabaab militants attacked a guest house in Mandera town. The Basharo Lodge is said to have been hosting non-locals. The attackers are said to have had a set of explosions using improvised explosives and grenades. The attack comes 3 weeks after 6 people were killed in an attack on non-locals at a residential plot in Bula Public Works in Mandera town. Just again to repeat that, at least 4 people have been injured after suspected Al-Shabaab militants attacked a guest house in Mandera town. The Basharo Lodge is said to have been hosting non-locals, and the attackers are said to have set off explosives using improvised explosives and grenades. The attack comes 3 weeks after 6 people were killed in an attack on non-locals at a residential plot in Bula Public Works in Mandera Town. More details will be coming in and we'll definitely keep you posted, so do stay with us right here. Koigi, we are in a state where this country, we are more polarized than probably we were during independence, especially amongst ourselves. Because at that time, maybe we had a common enemy who was the colonialist. But now we seem to be enemies to ourselves. What's the cause for that? How do we get out of that?
I think there are many reasons why we are a divided society. Some divisions are ethnic divisions, others are class. But nevertheless, we suffer from the consequences of these divisions. To start with, I think, let me mention that when we got independence, we were told that the three leading problems that the country faced and had to eliminate were poverty, disease, and ignorance. And the list was kept at that. Later, some of us realized that the list of the problems to be fought is much longer. Because one of the things that we have suffered from and has been a cause of our problems is bad leadership. In fact, I would say that at independence we started with bad leadership, and that is why we went the way that has led us to where we are, as opposed to other countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and this has been said by many people. Other than bad leadership, I believe that, and here I would like to quote a Kikuyu proverb that says that when the leadership limps, the flock does not reach the pastures. That is a proverb, a wisdom that we must never forget when we look at our problems. The other problem that we had and needed, and it needs to be looked at seriously, and it is out of Kenyatta's list, is the question of system. I believe that systems have a lot to do with whether a country develops or lags behind. If you have a system that encourages poverty or breeds divisions, greed and those kind of values, you end up, of course, the system ends up putting people down rather than helping them to get up.
So question
would
be...
after that, we have then problems that are bred by both bad leadership and bad system, which are poverty, corruption in a big way, negative ethnicity, ignorance in a big way, and of course that without solving those problems, the society ends up not being able to solve the original three problems that we were promised would be
taken care of.
Yes.
Now, we have been independent for the last 50 plus years, because now we're heading towards more than 50. And does Kenya have good leaders? Do we have good leaders that we have? Because it seems from what you're saying that all along we seem to be choosing from one bad leader to another.
Yes, that's what we have.
Do we have good leaders?
No, we don't have. If we have got good leaders, they are not in power.
Why
leaders
aren't they
that
in power?
Because people have not elected them to power.
So it sounds like a vicious circle. It sounds like our leadership is what gets us to where we are now, but yet we have no choice but to choose these leaders.
We have a choice. People can choose to elect good leaders, but it depends on whether they realize that the problems they have are solvable or not. A lot of people seem to think that what we have is some kind of natural condition that we have to live with. That the things we talk about, sometimes I think it has to do with the fact that they have not seen better. They have not. There was one time somebody called Wells went to Russia. The writer of 1984, I think also Animal Farm, I'm not quite sure. But Wells said he had been to heaven and it worked. He had been to Russia and back to Britain. And he thought that what he saw in Russia was exactly what the poor people of Britain needed. But what I'm saying is that we have persons that can make good leaders, but we don't believe. It's like we have become hopeless and prisoners to the rich people that come to us rich, powerful people that come to us, asking them for our votes. Once we have lost faith in the power of ideas, in having people who would give us good leadership without necessarily impoverishing us with exploitation. I think we have got stuck in a situation where we have become hopeless and we don't believe that it is possible to have the kind of change in leadership that is a must if we are going to change these other problems.
All right. Now, given our current political terrain and those that possibly we can already tell are emerging as those who would like to lead us as a country, examples of good leaders in your opinion, do we have any? Is there any you can pick up and say this seems to be a good leader?
I think most of our good leaders are dead. A person that I would say was a good leader was a person like J.M. Kariuki. He was a good leader. And what I say, what I mean by saying that somebody is a good leader, I'm talking about a leader who does not, for instance, engage in corruption. Somebody who does not understand leadership to mean an opportunity for him to accumulate wealth, amass wealth, and become rich. Somebody who is ready to sacrifice democracy and rule us by dictatorship, because that's the only thing that allows him to keep power and accumulate wealth. Good leaders are persons who are willing to sacrifice their lives even for the good of the country. Now, if you look at, at what happened after independence, you would say before independence, it's like we were a collective homestead that had been invaded, raided by foreigners, by white people, and been conquered, and these white people were determined to enslave us and keep us down forever. And we needed people now to get up and say no to this situation. How many people, the people who got up to say no were the Mau Mau. These Mau Mau have been rejected for leadership in this country. They are not recognized. They came out of detention poor. Their children did not get education, so they could not get into jobs, and so forth. After independence, we had a repeat of that same scenario, where again the society gets conquered. We have a few people putting themselves at the top of others. We don't have enough people who are willing to get up and say no to the situation, whatever the risk. And the ones that were there, we have seen them completely destroyed. People like Matiba, people like Rubia, you know now, they are far from, they have not been, since they said no to the situation, the people in power really destroyed them, literally. The government destroyed
that music means that we are out of time, and it's amazing how 1 hour just flies like that.
Wow.
And just your final comments on 2017. Do you think we have choices of a good leader for 2017? Very briefly, Koigi.
I don't know who is going to vie for elections, so it will be very difficult to know whether what we have are the best leaders that we could have. But I would ask people to realize that majority of us are still in the desert, and they need to go to the promised land. We need to take this country from being a third world country to a first world country. We must not say this is not possible. It is possible, but with the right leadership.
With the right leadership.
We must look at our leadership, examine their qualities. If they are good, even if they don't have money or don't come from our communities, let us elect them. Because without electing good leaders with vision,
we'll never see the promised land.
We will never see the promised land.
All right. Sorry, we'll have to wind it up right there. I know you still have a lot that you'd have wanted to share with us, but time waits for no man, not even for kings, so we are told. And this is where we'll have to wind up Person of Interest this morning. But do stay with us right here on KTN News for more information on that breaking story. For those of us on KTN Home, Life and Style is just about to begin. But if you'd like to catch up with what the news, breaking news is and updates on that, switch with us to KTN News, where we also have some more news updates. But later on, we'll also be looking at your money and find out what your body language says about you. Don't go away.